Afternoon and welcome everybody. This is the third session we've run on in this little training session. The first two were pretty much the same. This third one, again, will cover all the stuff we've covered before. So some of it might be a wee bit repetitive if you've been to any of the other two sessions. However, we do have a little bit extra on other outdoor stadiums for the likes of athletics and motorcycling and things like that there. So hopefully there might be a little bit more information which is more relevant to some of you guys here today. As ever, we've got Mark and Peter here from the SGSA. I would imagine most of you are familiar now with Mark and Peter and the work that they do in Northern Ireland, particularly around providing advice and guidance, you know, to stakeholders at the events, including event operators, council officers, and other stakeholders who are involved in hosting of events. So welcome to Peter and Mark as well. I just want to go over a couple of quick wee things here in relation to key dates and bits and pieces which have happened over the last few days. Of course, we know that from the 24th of May, which is Monday, we've got a return of spectators, and that's up to a maximum of 5,000. However, each case over 30 has to have its own risk assessment done. So 500 doesn't mean that you cram 500 into an event. It obviously has to cover its own risk assessment. So the guys will talk about that a little bit of that as well. We're still looking at 2 meter social distancing as of now. However, obviously that might change come the next review meeting, which is on the 10th of June, I believe. But as of now, we're still working on 2 meter social distancing, and obviously the wearing of face masks in and around, you know, the stadium, and particularly any indoor settings like toilets and concourses and things like that there. Other week dates said, I think indoor training begins on the 24th of May, and then the following week, hopefully we'll have indoor competition. But the indoor settings obviously don't have any spectators at present. And I think that's due to change come the 21st of June when the restrictions are lifted on indoor audiences. But again, those are all subject to reviews in between. So that's just a little flavour of where we're at with spectators. Obviously, we've got a learning and test event tomorrow night at the Irish Cup final. I know it's 1,000. I'm sure you're all aware. It is 1,000 because it is a learning and test event. It's not just any particular match, you know, or even a test event. We still have to abide by the 500 come Monday, whenever we open the gates to spectators. Finally, before I pass over to Mark, I just want to remind you this session is recorded, and that's good because I know there's a few people out there who are not able to join us today. So I'll get the message out through our social media of how you can access the recorded version, and you can pass that on to any colleagues who aren't here today, because obviously there's good information here for everyone who's involved in hosting events, and it would be a shame if they missed this here type of session. So thankfully this one's going to be recorded, and they'll be able to avail of it. And last thing is just question and answers. Appreciate if you would just leave that to the end, just to, you know, have a better flow of the presentation from Mark and Peter. You can put in your questions and answers in the little function at the bottom of your screen there. You'll see Q&A, so feel free to ask any questions through there, or alternatively, if you want to ask a question in person, we can do so after the end of the presentation. And we'll get to those, as I say, as soon as Peter and Mark are finished. So without further ado, we'll pass you over to Mark. I think it's Mark to begin, yeah?
Yes, Patrick, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. Welcome, everybody. So my name's Mark Holland from the Sports Ground Safety Authority. So just a little bit about myself first. I'm retired, 30 years in the police. I was a chief superintendent in the police, and part of my career was dealing with lots with sports, public order, gold, silver command and all that sort of stuff. So that's where my sort of experience comes from. And myself and Peter have been working in Northern Ireland now for about 3.5 years. Peter may introduce himself later, but Peter's the ex-stadium manager at Sunderland, amongst many other strings to his bow. So we're going to talk today around what we call SG02, which is basically supplementary guidance And this is the particular version for Northern Ireland because you've got 2 metre distances. So this is all in conjunction with the UK government 5 stages to return of spectators. But obviously each one of the 4 nations is at kind of different stages there because we all have different governments and all that sort of thing. So we're going to, I do appreciate, I've had a look down the list today, excuse me, and we've got, I see we've got some running clubs, we've got rally, motorsport, as well as you know, traditional venues that are at one location. So what Peter's done with this presentation is included now some slides and some guidance really on how to deal with those things that are perhaps a little bit more difficult to quantify when you're out and about rather than in a fixed venue. And then probably just to mention at the end, you know, I think Peter was at the Newcastle game last night. We have had test events. We had the Crucible event, which I visited. So we may be able to answer any questions you've got at the end around return to spectators, because we have got a little bit of knowledge around how that's going as well at the moment. So we could do that. And I was actually involved yesterday with the Safety Advisory Group meeting for the Cup final that Elizabeth Reaney chaired from ABC Council. So, we may be able to cover 1 or 2 extra things at the end. Okay, so what we'll cover today. Excuse me. So for those of you who are used to working at a fixed venue, a lot of this will be familiar. Around capacities, we issue the Green Guide, which is really a book that talks about safe entry, exit, holding capacities and all that sort of thing. So we're going to talk about lots of things here based around initially a lot of stadium type stuff, but then, as I say, we'll move on to some broader venues and sort of out and about venues as well. So that's a sort of list of things that we'll cover today. So first of all, just around some of the spectator space. So obviously what you can see on the screen there around a standing spectator is that normally is an elliptical shape. But for the purposes of this guidance, we've made that into a circle, which is kind of in line with what Fruin, who is an expert from 1971 in crowd science and crowd movement, that's how things are dealt with. So for a standing spectator, we're going to deal with a 450 by 600 millimeter round circle. And then for a seated spectator, we're going to assume a 500 millimeter width for that. Okay, so your guidance at the moment is 2 meters. Your social distance guidance is 2 meters shoulder to shoulder. So just to cover method 1, and then I think as we go through this, I'll concentrate on method 2. But method 1 would be a 2 meter distance from the center of the body to the center of the body. So from shoulder to shoulder, that's 1.4 meters. But for your current state there, you've got a 2 meter shoulder to shoulder distance, which is a total of 2.6 meters if you were to measure that from the center of the head or center of the body to the next person. Now, of course, that's just the social distance measurement. Of course, what we've got around events and planning for events are other mitigations such as masks, stewarding, staff intervention, good communication prior to the event, during the event. So this just fits in a bit of a whole basket of different measures. Okay, so the next slide here, we want to introduce the concept of channel widths. So this might get a little bit technical, and please ask questions at the end around this. And also, by all means, our details are available with Patrick as well. But what we'd normally look at for people, for example, exiting a football ground or a rugby ground or a GAA ground, is that they would often go through some kind of channel, often a vomitory. And how we would normally measure that is how many people per meter per minute go through that channel. So it's a meterage measurement. So for example, some of you may be familiar with the fact that on a level surface, under normal events, when we haven't got COVID, we expect 82 people to pass through a minute, a certain point. And if there's 3 meters, we'd multiply that by 3 meters. And the basic standard for emptying a stadium is 8 minutes. So 82 times 3 meters, if we had a 3 meter vomitory times 8 is 1968. So 1,968 people can actually go through that area. And that's how ground safety officers and people calculate a safe capacity as to how many exits and what the exit widths need to be to get people out safely. Now, we've gone away from, for the purposes under COVID and for the purposes of SGO2, we've had to go away from meterage into what we call channels. Now, on the right there, because we've got a 2 meter distance from shoulder to shoulder, if you then add in the 300 millimeters or 30 centimeters additional for the width of those people, what we need to actually get people out, if they were to walk along the edges of the wall, if you can imagine an exit of vomitory, is 3.2 meters. So we've got this now concept of channels, which then the point we need to make here is that that drastically reduces the amount of people we can get out. Now, in the first place, as you'll see soon, we've got social distancing in ground, so you may be down to 11% roughly of your normal capacity. So it's not so much of a problem, but what we need to get across here is that this channel width rather than meterage does reduce your exit capacities even more. Okay. So I just mentioned there that the normal exit rate that we would look at for method for non-COVID times is that 8 minutes is kind of a standard based around emergency evacuation and making sure you can get people out of a stand in 8 minutes. It's based around a historical fire method. And we would normally expect on a flat surface, so if you're just walking out of the ground with no steps involved, no stairways, that 8 to 2 people can pass that point within a minute. Okay, and that's a meterage evaluation. Now that measurement has gone down to 28 because we have to socially distance by that 2 meters all the time. So the point here again is that you're down to around about a third of your normal exit capacity on a level surface. On a step surface, if people have to exit from an upper tier or a stand, a seating deck, and they need to, as part of that exit route to get out of the particular stand they're in, if they need to use any stairs, any step surface, that normal rate is 66 people per minute per meter. That now down is per channel to 21. So again, around about a third of your normal exit flow rate. So we just need to be aware that, yes, we've got fewer people in the stadium, but also your exit and flow rates and actual entrance flow rates would be affected by this, and you can get fewer people in and out of the stadium. Now, just talking about entry. Okay, so the first thing is that turnstiles. So because you've got, again, a 2 meter requirement shoulder to shoulder, you may find that if you've got 2 or even 3 turnstiles that are blocked together, you may only be able to use one of those. It may be that you can only use 1 out of 4. Certainly what we've found with, we've got in football in England and Wales at the moment, it's a 1 meter from the middle of the body separation, and basically 1 in every turnstile has been shut. But obviously if you had a bank of 4 turnstiles absolutely next to each other, or 3 turnstiles next to each other, again, you'd need to consider that 2 meters shoulder to shoulder, which is 3.2 meters from the center of each body, and you'd have to close sufficient turnstiles to ensure that you maintain that social distancing. Now, one way of getting around that, if you like, is to look at entry lanes. So not actually using your turnstiles, but you could have an exit gate, which is quite wide. You often see this at cricket. Cricket spectators often come through a wide gate where you've got sort of trellis tables set up and a bit of a search maybe and a ticket check and all that sort of stuff. So you may think that if your entry to turnstiles is really so hampered, you might want to use your turnstile, but also use entry lanes or use entry lanes. And again, your entry lanes would need to be sufficient width to give that separation between people. Just consider as well, if you've got a busy event, excuse me, that with separation, your queuing is likely to take a lot longer, and that needs to be socially distanced and probably stewarded. and we would probably recommend that you'd probably need some kind of signage or some floor markers, as you've probably seen in many of the supermarkets, and that's kind of set up to ensure that people are socially distanced. And also you'd need to consider that a lot of the kiosks and food vendors and that sort of thing, concourses are probably shut, so people may be bringing in food, so they may have more baggage, and if you need to search those people around counter-terrorism issues or just general security issues, that also may take longer because of social distancing and because people are bringing in additional stuff. So we've talked about flow rates a little bit already, but we're assuming at the moment about a 12% reduction in flow rates, but this is very dependent on the social distancing. Obviously, with Northern Ireland having 2 meters shoulder to shoulder, that restricts it slightly more, but we're just waiting for some kind of science from a company called Movement Strategies, who have been studying flow rates amongst social distancing, but we are assuming at least a 12% reduction in flow rates. So one of the ways of getting around the queuing and searching issue is communication and ensuring that as far as possible, if people can arrive in a staggered way or even exit in a staggered way, then that might work. That does have some issues, but certainly around entry, you may want to try and stagger people's entry through communication and tickets. And so on to ticketing. So the sale of tickets could be dictated to a little bit around width of seats, for example. So we've assumed that a 500 millimeter width of seat. However, there are some 500 millimeter seats, but many stadiums will have a seat which is actually 460 millimeters wide. Now, if that is the case, then you may actually have to separate people even more, because you've got less separation because the width of the seat actually restricts that. So you could end up, for example, having 5 seats between people. Now Peter's going to go through a couple of worked examples in a few minutes, so he will work through how that actually looks in a full seating deck, but you could be restricted to every 3rd row depending on the width of your seats. What's really important, and something that's happening at Mornview Park for the FA Cup final, is that because you need to socially distance and you need certainty around where people are sitting, you will need to ensure that if your stand and seating is not numbered around your block, your row and your seat number, you will need to do that. And I know certainly in one of the stands for the FA Cup final this weekend, they are working on that, because they wouldn't ordinarily sell tickets to allocated seats. So that's something to bear in mind. Now, the ticket sales database is key. Some of you will be using computerized systems such as Ticketmaster or similar types of things, and if you are looking to use that, then please contact whoever provides your ticket database and your software, because there are bolt-on bits of software and apps you can use to actually load in the actual seating deck at a socially distanced level. At the moment you're at 2 meters. It could be that sometime in the future, before you go back to full crowds, Northern Ireland could say, well, we're going to go to 1 meter or some other social distance. So again, that might be useful in the future if there's a step change approach to actually getting back to full crowds. But certainly the way you sell tickets can be efficient as well, because if you can sell them to people from the same household who can sit together and don't need to socially distance the 2 meters, then that can actually maximize your ticket sales and become an efficient way of at least achieving around about 11% of your seating deck. And just to mention, we could cover this at the end, that there is a way of kind of looking at terracing in a similar way, but Peter might cover that a little bit later on, because he's certainly seen some example of that at Carlisle, where they were able to kind of to mark out the terracing, so you were able to actually get people onto a terrace into a particular area which was socially distanced. But I must stress for all these methods that stewarding is really key to this as well. Obviously it's good to construct this, but obviously it will need some safety and crowd management as well. Test and trace key, and again this could be linked back to your ticket sales database. But obviously, if you're selling tickets to people and you know the block row seat number and you know who's buying them, then of course, you know, if you need to test and trace, you should have those details within your ticket manifest. Okay, so moving on to concourses and the capacities there. Now, the normal method for concourses is, in fact, Peter, can you just flick forward to the next line and then come back to this one? Thank you. So what we'd normally look in normal times for a concourse, if you look at that diagram on the left-hand side there, that's a density, well, that's 10 square meters. The maximum number of people you could get into a static crowd in there would be 4.7 or 470 people per square meters. Now that's a packed crowd. In a concourse, you would want some movement between the crowd. So that illustration shows you at 20 people per 10 square meters. Sorry, you could get 47, sorry, in that area, not 470. So that's about half capacity. In a concourse, you'd probably want some sort of movement through it as people go to and from the seating deck or the kiosk or whatever. So we'd normally get at least 30 people in every 10 square meters, and that allows movement. The diagram on the right there shows that under the current 2 meters shoulder to shoulder socially distanced capacities, each person requires 6.8 square meters. So we've had to even extend to explain this to you up to 20 square meters would only actually get 3 people in. So where you'd normally be looking at getting 60 people probably into a 20 square meter concourse or an area, we're talking 3 people and each person needs 6.8 people square meter. So just moving back to that capacity there, under method 2, that means that you're allowed 1.5 persons per 10 square meters, or 3 people as we extended in that other diagram per 20 square meters, but each individual needs 6.8 square meters. So you can see the effect this would have also on terraced areas, but the basic advice around concourses that we've given both in Northern Ireland and in England and Wales, where we cover football and other sports, is that concourses have got to be closed, because that is your limiting factor. And Peter will cover that in his presentation in a few minutes. So we've just included this slide here. This is something that we've prepared and Peter wrote for Sport Northern Ireland. You may have seen this this leaflet that's gone out. So it's just to bring you to your attention that that's out there. It kind of condenses a lot of the information and advice into a couple of sides there. But I'm just going to concentrate on the next slide where we've blown up that diagram, and just to again illustrate how restrictive 2 meters per shoulder to shoulder social distancing is. So this is an example of a ground that's got no stands. So we're kind of now extending this out into the domain of perhaps some of the running clubs, the rallying and other events that are interested today. So you can see the dimensions around there. There's 25, 2 lots of 25 meters, 100 meters down one side, a couple of 35 meters down another side, 270 meters of level standing. If you allow that 2.6 meters per person, your maximum capacity around 270 meters of level flat standing is just 103 people. So that might be a useful illustration for you if you're looking, let's say it's a road rally or a road race or something that's happening on a road, to give you an idea on a linear viewing area, which is on a flat standing area, some of the restrictions and some of the numbers that you probably need to be working to. Thank you, Peter. Okay, so just to cover 1 or 2 concourse facilities, again at 2 meters shoulder to shoulder, 2.6 meters between each person's center of the body, you will need to shut some urinals, possibly cubicles and hand basins. So again, that needs to be stewarded. Consider whether the toilet is a one-way in, one-way out, or whether it's a one-way system where you exit, you enter in one area and go out of another. That's sometimes helpful, but you'll probably need to then also manage the queues within those areas. So it's really important that you think about this, because although your concourse would probably be shut, because that would really limit your overall capacity, people would need to use the facilities. So think about hand washing, whether you could provide some separate method of hand washing, because again, you're going to end up with quite a number of your hand basins closed and all that sort of thing. And you might consider extra sanitizer stations, not as good as hand washing, but obviously it's better than nothing. So you might want to just consider all those sorts of things, use of seat covers within your toilets, and even using, we've seen quite a number of grounds have put up portaloos and additional toilets outside of the ground, in the areas just outside of at the rear of stands, etc. So circulation within the stadium, things to consider here is that concourses were probably closed. So think about your routes from the turnstile, because, and again, it might be useful if you're not using turnstiles, you could get people through one course. So how do they get into the seating deck? How are they socially distanced? And then also you need to consider how that works within the stadium. Again, Peter will cover this in a few minutes, but we've seen quite a lot of one-way systems around seating blocks. So you get out your seat, you may have to go up to the back of the stand, across to the left, down the seats, into the concourse, use the toilet, and then you use that one-way system. So you're not actually brushing past and facing anybody and everybody's working the same direction. It's not always possible, depends on the layout of the ground, and kind of think a little bit outside the box here as well. Normally we don't use cinder tracks or some areas that for people circulating to from the stadium, in and out the stadium. Perhaps think about extra areas that you've got which you don't normally allow the crowd to use. So that's quite important. Egress is key. Certainly we've seen, I went to the ERP test event at the Crucible, really well run, and I've seen this at football recently as well. So people come in fairly orderly, they have a one-way system, the toilet queues are dead good at half time, they go back to the seat in a one-way system, and then as soon as the final whistle goes, and particularly in sports like football, but we even saw it at the Crucible, people naturally just stand up and start moving. So it's kind of difficult, this is, to get people to not react to a final whistle or that sort of thing, but think about your egress equally. Now there's there's two ways of looking at this. You could actually manage that and allow people to move and get your steward in and people to manage it, or you could try and empty a seating deck one block at a time or a stand at a time. But the problem with that is that you may actually get people leaving the seats and then all congregating near an exit while you're waiting for that particular stand to empty. So egress, I think in our experience, we would say, is probably the most challenging bit of this. But if you're aware of it beforehand, you can hopefully steward it and put plans in place and perhaps use extra areas for that. So signage is important, and just remember with signage to make sure it's visible. So sometimes people put signage up at 4 foot, 5 foot, because when they put the signage up, the stadium's empty. Really important that if you're going to put signage up, it needs to be at a sufficient height so you can actually see it when there are crowds in the stadium. And as you'll see on the next slide here, some of the sort of stuff that the floor signage is really useful. And I think people are probably used to that in other places such as doctors, supermarkets, etc. So that's probably a good way of looking at that. Flow rates we've covered, so just bear in mind those restricted flow rates, so people are going to take much longer to get out of the ground. And then into Zone X, so the area outside of your venue, just think about, obviously you will have a restricted crowd, but if you have got large crowds attending certain areas, and if we've got rallies, road races, things in more of the public domain, just think about whether public transport can actually cope with the number of people coming to the venue if they are travelling by that method, because you have to also ensure that to and from the event people can socially distance on trains, buses, whatever other method you've got. So perhaps in your planning meetings you might just need to consider some of the external effects of that. And this of course all has an impact on wheelchair users. So I would say that this needs to be really carefully planned. Obviously some wheelchair users and other people around accessibility have a carer that comes with them, so obviously they would be in the same bubble, but think about how they access the ground. Has anything you've done affected what would normally be happened around accessibility? So again, this might need individual stewarding and all that sort of thing, but really important that we think about people with accessibility issues.
Thanks for that, Mark. It's Peter now. I'll just cover the sort of tail end of the presentation. But what you can see on the screen there is just a graphical representation of a seating deck. And, you know, Mark talked earlier about how people need to be spaced in a particular venue, in the attempt to maintain this 2 meter separation in the seating deck. And these seats here are 500 millimeters, so you can see that we've left 4 seats empty between spectators. And then often we're leaving seats empty at the end of rows so that radial gangways can also be used in a one-way fashion to enable people to leave the seating deck and get out to facilities, the WCs, during the field of play. Now, of course, this we'll talk a little later about how this can be used. This method can be used in other sports, particularly where we have open spaces. We're trying to occupy open spaces for spectators, linear spaces such as road racing. So we'll touch on that in a second. But what's really important to understand is that we're going to talk about a stadium because in calculating the socially distant capacity, it makes sense for us to use one single environment. That means that we're using all of the different calculations that may well come into being when you're looking at your particular venue, space, or event. So what we'll do is we'll look at this fictitious stadium. We're going to look at one small portion of the stadium. That's that section in the blue hoop there. And it's too small to see at the moment, so I'm going to expand on that in a second. But as you can see, just at the bottom of that slide there, you'll see that section of the stadium. You'll see there are seats in place just in front of the 4 vomitories. In reality, those seats actually go up and beyond that lateral gangway, and they cover over the concourse as well. So it's, if you can imagine, the seats go from the pitch side all the way to the back of the building. But of course, they're not shown on this graphic because it's just a drawing showing only the ground floor, not the next level up. So we're going to drill down a little further into this stadium, which this portion is able to accommodate 9,000 people, or just over 9,000 people. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at different elements of this area of the stadium and just talk about how we go about calculating the capacity in this particular venue. And the first thing we need to consider is how many people would you normally get in that seating deck? Now we know that it's generally 9,085 people in this portion of the stadium. And because of social distancing, we're obviously not able to cope with those sorts of numbers. So it's all about the ticketing strategy, and the ticket office need to understand what seats can be made available while maintaining social distancing. And often this can drop down way into, as Mark said earlier, around about 10% of your true seated capacity. So for the sake of this calculation, we're going to use that 10% figure, which is 908 people we can accommodate in that section of the stadium. And of course, that figure really needs to come from the ticket office once they start to sell tickets, because they may well be selling in singles, in pairs, in 4s, and now they can go into groups of 6 or family bubbles. So the larger the bubble, the greater the accommodation, the amount of accommodation can be used on this particular seating deck. We need to also understand the area of the concourse, because that becomes a real limiting factor for capacity at a venue. So this could be the area that you've chosen to have for milling around or for food and beverage, and these areas are key, because there's a real consideration as to how many people we can accommodate within that space, because that's where social distancing could well be compromised. So we understand that this area, hatched in green there, I'll get my cursor so you can see it. So this area here, hatched in green, equates to 667 square meters. And of course, it's a very simple calculation, as Mark mentioned earlier. It's dividing that by 6.8, which is the number of square meters required for each person. So that drags us all the way down to 98 persons. And obviously that's much less than the capacity on the seating deck. So what we may want to do on this concourse is say, actually, we're going to close the concourse. We're not going to use the kiosks or the food and beverage outlets. And all we're going to use the concourse for is access from the turnstiles through into the seats and then out from the seating deck at the end of the venue, and then during the event to access WCs from the seating deck. So that's a choice we need to make. The next calculation looks at the ingress into the stadium, and as Mark said, there's an understanding of the pace at which people would pass through a single turnstile, and it's 660 people per hour, just for your information. And we would have 16 turnstiles along the face of this section of the building, but because the turnstiles are so close to one another, we can only use one in each set. So that means that it's a really simple calculation. We have 8 turnstiles. We understand that normally we get 660 people through those turnstiles in an hour, but Mark already touched on the fact that we recognize that through social distancing, through the need to search, that's delayed by about 12%. So the figure would be 4,464 people that we could accommodate in those 8 turnstiles in this portion of the building. In this blue section here, we're going to consider exiting. A really important issue, because this is often the key factor for capacity at venues, is the speed at which we can get people out of a venue. And Mark touched on this 8-minute rule, and this is quite an old volume or figure in relation time span in relation to exiting. It hasn't changed, and what's understood now is that any longer than 8 minutes, people start to become really anxious about leaving the venue, particularly if they're mindful of the fact that it is an emergency. So the general consideration almost worldwide now is to say, let's make sure we can get people out of a venue within this 8-minute period. So that's used as a calculation for the exit speed or the egress speed from a venue. So for us, we need to look at how people would leave and where the pinch points are. So in each of these 4 exiting systems, so we've got these 4 vomitories, one here, one there, one here, and one there. And each of those exiting systems, we have 4 lead-in radial gangways from the seating deck. And then that ultimately, those vomitories ultimately lead to the 2 exit gates almost right opposite them. So the final exit gate is the one we'll calculate first. So we know we've got 8 sets of gates. We know we've got 8 minutes. And as Mark mentioned earlier, the pace at which people would travel while maintaining 2-meter social distancing is 28 people per minute per channel. So it's a very simple calculation. We've got 8 exit gates. We've got 8 minutes. We know that 28 people can travel through it. That gives us a figure of 1,792. Now, if we look at the vomitory exit widths, we've got 4 of those vomitories. We can accommodate 2 lanes. We've got 8 minutes, and we have the 28 people per channel. So that gives a similar figure of 1,792. Now the radial gangways, that is 4 radial gangways and 4 minutes, sorry, 4 radial gangways, 4 vomitories, 8 minutes, and this figure now is 21. There's 21 people on a stepped radial gangway per channel per minute. And that gives us a figure of 2,688. Now, with all of these calculations, what we have to do is we have to look at those in a summary document and say, okay, which one are we going to adopt as the governing factor for the safe capacity in this portion of the stadium? And as true Green Guide style, it's always the lowest of those figures. So we know that the available viewing area is 9,000, just over 9,000 people. We know that the holding capacity, which is a figure that we're going to get from the ticket office, but at the moment we're assuming it's only 10% of the seated capacity. So that's 908 people. And we already know that the concourse holding capacity is way down in the order of 98. It's asterisked there because we're not going to use that figure going forward. We're going to close the concourse. The entry capacity we've calculated through the turnstiles at 4,646. And then the exiting capacity is 1,792. That's the lower of those exiting figures. Now, the emergency exit capacity is something we don't have to linger on here, but that's the normal exiting capacity. So that's the assumption is that this emergency trumps COVID-19 or the pandemic, and that we need to get everybody out in an emergency. It's a terrorist issue or it's a fire. So we go back to the original emergency exit figures, which are based on the figures that Mark touched on early on. It's the exits, the exit widths in meters times either 66 or 82, depending on whether it's on a flat surface or a stairs, times 8 minutes. And for us, if we're calculating all of those exit gates or all of the vomitories and radial gangways, it comes to the figure of 10,496. So that's not going to be an issue for us going forward. So therefore, the socially distant capacity of this portion of the ground is 908 people. Obviously, we're still using this normal egress time of 8 minutes. What we could do is we could say, actually, we're going to artificially relax that. We're going to say we could slow that down to some degree. So we could manipulate those figures as long as we have some clear understanding and we have the cooperation of fans. So if generally fans in your particular sport are largely compliant, what you may want to do is actually take a look at that 8 minutes and say, actually, we could change it. We could make it 9 or 10 minutes, and therefore gives us slightly higher capacity, because we're mindful of the fact that people don't leave instantly after the event. They sort of drift out. But what you always have to bear in mind is that the emergency capacity always has to also be calculated. So previously on when we've been presenting this information, we've had questions at the end of the events that have asked, all sorts of different issues, and we did one for Wimbledon, and this is Henman Hill, and they asked how could they calculate a socially distant capacity for Henman Hill, and we give that some thought, and there is this crazy graphic on the internet of people occupying spaces in parks, but actually it's not as daft as it seems. What we can do is on Google Earth. I don't know whether you've all used Google Earth, but it's a really helpful tool. It gives you this ability to calculate an area of grass. In this area, we're just concentrating on the grassed area, not necessarily the seating steps here, but we'll concentrate on this grassed area here, and that gives us a gross area of 1,599 square meters. So we can start to understand the space that's available to us, and then what we can start to plot on that graph how many people we can accommodate. So say, for instance, as we did for Wimbledon, we understand that a seated person occupies an area of just under 3/4 of a meter, 0.75 meters. So we could quickly understand how many people we could accommodate within a circle, maintaining that 1 meter social distancing. And then, of course, we've got to allow for gaps of 1 meter for people to pass through these circles. Or if we're promoting two-way movement, then 1.6 meters between the circles. Very easy to do. And a lot of venues have already considered this when calculating accommodation, such as Henman Hill on a bank, or other types of event like air shows and balloon festivals are already considering this, concerts, etc. So for us, when we're considering this in Northern Ireland, we have to go even one step further, because, as you know, we're considering 2 meter social distancing. So to do that, we obviously know that we need 1.5 meters for these patrons that could occupy a space within the circle. We need to maintain 2 meters social distancing around those patrons. So therefore, each of these circles, if we're accommodating 3 or 4 people, need to be in the order of 3.5 meters in diameter. And then, of course, when we set those out, we need to make sure that we're maintaining at least 2.6 meters. That would allow single movement between each of these circles. I know it seems like a really complex way to calculate the numbers of people we could accommodate, but once you've done that in a particular area, then you have a real understanding of how many people you can accommodate within a given space. You could simply divide that whole area by 6.8, but what you wouldn't be doing there is you wouldn't be organizing these clusters of people, 3s and 4s and possibly 5s within a circle. That would give you much greater density. And of course, some of these large events, people aren't going to go and sit in a circle by themselves. They're always going to be accompanied by other patrons. So that's a strategy that you could use for open space or a banked area accommodation. Another option is to say, okay, what are we going to do for a road race where we're trying to accommodate people in a linear plane? Now, this is a short stretch of the 7 Mile Straight in Northern Ireland. And I just looked at an area where you could say, well, actually, this looks like a portion of that roadway that you could accommodate a number of spectators. Now, this would need to be a banked area, and as you know, that's a pretty flat part of Northern Ireland, so this necessarily isn't. But if you can imagine that this grassed area just to the upper side of the roadway is slightly banked, so you can start to consider having rows of spectators viewing this spectacle on the actual roadway itself. Now, this could be inside an actual raceway, or in this case, it's just on the public highway. Ideally, what you'd want to maintain is an ability to gain access, but also a separate egress from each of these spaces. And again, it's a very simple calculation. So in Google Earth, it gives you the ability, once you raise this pane under ruler, it gives you the ability to measure widths. So once you've got that open, you could place your cursor here, drop the cursor there, and that will give you a long linear line, and it will give you the actual measurement here in meters of that space. So we now know that from this point here to that point there, we have 104 meters. And of course, if it's flat and level spectator space, then all we're doing is we're just going to have one linear length of spectators. And if that was the case, then it's very easy, as Mark touched on before, where you're talking about a linear measurement for spectators. It's the number of meters you have divided by 2.6, which is the space required. So you've got the 600 millimeters for the person, and then 1 meter either side to maintain social distancing. And then, of course, the next person also has their 600 millimeters and another meter. So that generates the 2 meter gap between each person. So that's a simple measurement. So for this linear length of 103 meters, we can accommodate 40 spectators. Now, it may well be that if it is a banked surface, you want to say, actually, because we have stewards here, we have an entry point, we're going to charge for entry. We're not making any money with this 40 spectators. We need more people. If it is a banked surface, then what you can do is you can say we can have another row of spectators to increase capacity. But to do that, obviously, you need to make sure that people can pass along the back of these spectators stood here watching the spectacle without compromising social distancing. So to do that, we need to maintain 1.6 meters for the person stood against the rail. You need to make sure that the person traveling has their own 2.6 meters of space to move. And then, of course, we need to add the 1 meter of space for the spectator stood in the second row. So to enable us to do that, we need to have 5.2 meters between each of these spectators going back. So that's another simple way of calculating the number of spectators we can accommodate within a given space. So how do we move this forward? So of course, we're going to use that same methodology throughout the whole venue. So whether your venue is a large motorcycle or a four-wheeled race in Northern Ireland, you have to calculate or understand the areas of accommodation and how you're going to manage that. You're going to better understand the ticketing system, how you can ensure that people are driven to the space that you've allowed them to occupy. Now, normally, if I go back to that slide, as Mark touched on earlier, where we've been able to use terracing in a ticketing system, what they've done generally is they've said, okay, let's understand how many crush barriers we have within a terrace, and they've numbered them or lettered them and sold the number of spectators that could be accommodated behind each barrier. Becomes a bit more complex in this process, but nevertheless, it might be something that you want to consider, because what you're also going to have to understand is how you manage track and trace for your events, so that if there is an incident, you can understand who was here, where they actually stood, whether they were on row 1, row 2, or row 3. So we need to understand the ticketing system because we need to ensure that we can track and trace. There's a whole raft of different methodology that enables you, if it is a stadium or a seated venue, that enables you to use that ticketing system and then plot those patrons onto the seating deck, maintaining social distancing. Of course, you will have, and probably already have done, a whole load of policies and plans and risk assessments that you need to review. Mark's already touched on signage and the real importance of allowing people to understand what's required of them when they arrive at the venue or at the site. Zone X is a real issue for us, and we need to understand what happens when we come to the end of our event, when people leave the venue all at the same time. What happens outside the venue? Is there a pelican crossing? Is there a bridge over a road? Is there an underpass? Is there something that causes further pedestrian congestion? And then we have to understand how best we manage that and whether that impacts on the capacity we have within the venue. More importantly, as Mark touched on, can public transport cope with the numbers that we're trying to accommodate within the venue? So what we need to do is share good practice, and we're doing that at the moment. Mark and I have an enormous amount of learnings from events that have already taken place, and we've adapted this presentation to cover those. Fan engagement is really key, and that personal fan engagement has proved to be really key. And we actually quote, I mean, we've got Chris Shields here from Ulster Rugby, but we actually quote Kingspan's piece to YouTube, which was fantastic in allowing fans to understand what would be required of them when they return to the venue. So they did a great piece, and I think that all of the other YouTube pieces that have been done for other venues have more or less copied that whole profile, because it was really a fantastic publication. You may well have a safety advisory group, and if you do, it's really important that there's some engagement in relation to your event and how that's managed and what you propose to do. Really key also to have public health involved in that meeting, so that you have an early understanding of what is planned, so that at the last minute they don't say actually the event can't go ahead, and there's an enormous amount of wasted effort and probably cost. Local authority need to do their assessment of the event, and of course it's really important, if it is a venue, then try and look at test events so that you start to understand the pace at which people can pass through the turnstiles and or use the WCs or use the other catering facilities. Excuse me. So test events are really key, and it may well be that they are 30% of your true socially distant capacity, building up to what would be your maximum social distant capacity. So we've already talked about what happens outside the venue and the considerations for Zone X. And there's this link, as Mark touched on earlier, of the transport capacity and the stadium capacity or the event capacity. And it's really chicken and egg, because you need to understand how people are going to use that transport system. So when you do the ticket sales, try and understand the demographics of those ticket sales, how they're going to get to the venue. Are they using private cars? Have you provided sufficient car parking space for that to be? If not, then if they are going to use public transport, what sort of numbers are going to come in what direction, so that you can quickly gauge what sort of capacity you can have at the venue. And of course, if you look at Wembley Stadium, for instance, in London, 90-seater stadium, 1 meter plus social distancing means that they can have 30,000 people in the venue. But can the underground cope with 30,000 people still trying to maintain 2 meter social distancing on the underground? So it's a real chicken and egg thing here. You need to understand whether the public transport can cope with the numbers you're going to allow at your particular venue. We've already talked about the ticketing information and how that could be key to allowing people to understand the time they would need to arrive at the venue, how they're going to get there, which gate they enter the venue, and so forth. Collaboration is key. We're already doing that at the moment, and as you move towards your events, the more people you can get on board and understand what the plans are, the better. And Mark's already touched on this, but consider all pedestrian routes, because that's proved to be really problematic with some of these events. At the close of the event, when they're leaving the venue, they find that there's a further pinch point that really compromises social distancing. And what you've got to remember is that you're not the only country trying to deal with 2 meter social distancing. We are too. The only difference is that in the venues, we have this 1 meter plus mitigation, but outside the venues, where we still need to maintain this 2 meter social distancing. So that's us finished with the presentation now. And I think I'm going to give the mic back to Paddy, and Paddy's going to try and collate any questions, or whether you have any queries, please feel free to ask the questions. And I'm sure that either Mark and I would be able to answer. And if we can't, we promise that we will come back to you quickly after.
Thanks, Peter and Mark. At the minute, I don't have any questions coming through on the question and answer function. I think Alan Callahan has a question here. He's raising his hand. Alan, give me 1 wee second, and I'll make you available to speak here. Bear with me 1 wee second. Okay, Alan, that's you now. You should be able to ask the question now. You might need to unmute there, Alan.
Yeah, got you now. Sorry about that.
Okay.
My name is Alan Cullen, and I'm from Enniskillen Motor Club. And my question was really for Peter on his presentation there on crowd and areas and things like that. I was just wondering, now I wouldn't be the greatest mathematician in the world, but on his scenario there of Henman Hill, how do you calculate how many people are allowed into that area, given that the area is not your standard square or rectangle? I'm thinking of our own events where we use an airfield, and we would have a grassed spectator area, and it might have 7 or 8 different sizes on it, or sides on it, shall we say. And I'm just wondering, how do you calculate how many people you would be allowed into that area?
Alan, it is quite complex, but what I would suggest is that you need to scale that area. So if you were to look on Google Earth and roughly take the calculations of each of those bordering dimensions and plot them on a piece of paper, and then make sure you're using a scale rule, then you can start to quickly understand the number of circles of accommodation you can get within that space. But I think you're right. An airfield, obviously, really probably a complex shape.
Yes.
But it's a really key thing to understand. And I don't know if you've used Google Earth measurement before. It's free to use. You just need to download Google Earth. But what it does do is that once you start to plot these dimensions on your personal graphic, you can then go back to Google Earth and check that you have the dimensions correct. It's really, really key piece of software that can be used to make sure you clearly understand how many people can be accommodated.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alan. Have any other questions? So say, raise your hand and I can unmute you, or you can use the chat function or the question and answer function there at all.
Is it called Google Earth Pro, Peter?
Yeah, there is a Google Earth Pro.
Yeah. So if you've got Google Earth, a lot of people have that as a standard. So I think you need to download it. I think it's Google Earth Pro, isn't it? And it gives you all those.
Still free though.
Still free. Yeah.
Okay, question from David Guild. Is the 2.6 likely to reduce here in accordance with the UK at our event? The 2.6 usually reduces capacity even over 3 miles. At the minute, you know, the 2 meter social distancing is the guidance and what's been passed down to us from the Northern Ireland Executive. This learning event, which we have tomorrow night, the social distancing is down to 1 meter, for the simple reason it's a learning event. If we do have a successful event and there's good learning from that, it may well then go to further to sort of like, as I say, you know, the future learning them could say that we will be able to reduce that social distancing, but it's not just as simple as that. There's other mitigating factors, but at the minute we are abiding by that 2 meter social distancing, and as of yet we don't know if and when that will be reduced. But as I say, from the learning event, hopefully the learning from that there will be able to enable the executive to maybe make a decision further down the line to reduce that to 1 metre. I hope that answers your question, David.
So I think we've gone through a lot of information and a lot of data there. And the hope is, Patrick, that we've still got the same number of people that we started with on the call.
We've lost a couple, but it may well be that they had other appointments at 4 o'clock. But
yeah, of course.
Most of the people who started are still here.
I think what's important to understand is that it may well be that post presentation, you might come up with something that say, actually, I wish I'd asked that. Please send it through via Patrick to us via email, and we promise we will get back to you and answer any questions retrospectively.
Yeah, there's no problem with that. You can direct any questions at all through me, and if I can answer them, I'll certainly pass them on to the guys, and they can liaise with you directly. I will forward, Peter, we can forward the presentation. I think you forwarded it to me, so I forward a copy of the presentation, and also I think that document about smaller venues is within that presentation, Peter, so I don't think there's a requirement to send that document separately. I think it is within the body of the presentation. Yep, no problem. That's fine, Mark. I'll send that through. Mark's just sent a wee message there about the presentation. So as I say, I'll forward that over the next day. Hopefully, if not today, it'll be tomorrow to everyone who's registered.
Okay.
Listen, guys, if you've no other questions, that's essentially our session over. We're going to hang about here for maybe 5 minutes or so. So if you do have any other questions or specific questions to a particular event, maybe you didn't want to speak about in front of everyone, feel free to hold on there, and we can get to you as everybody else leaves. So if you are leaving, thanks for attending. And as I say, by all accounts, contact myself if you have any further queries.
Paddy, it would be good to get some feedback to see whether we actually tick the box as far as the information you required as well.
Yeah, certainly. As I say, by all accounts, please contact myself if you find that this was useful, or if there was something maybe we've missed that you would like us to cover again. However, this is a recorded session. We don't intend to run another session, but I suppose it's good for feedback if there is something you think that maybe needs covered, and Peter and Mark can look at that there for going forward if there's anything else that they need to do. There's one coming through here. David, again, on the slide, flat or banked, how or could that be affected by larger bubbles or groups? So again, Peter, I think bubbles are allowed in terms of if you came in a family. Obviously, there's certain parts where you don't have to abide by that 2.6 meter distancing, but you'll be able to explain that better than I can.
I think if the plan is to plot out these circles, then you'd want to start to understand a regular size. Otherwise, it would be really complex, particularly if this event is running over a number of days. It would be really complex to start to plot circular diameters of different sizes. So ideally, what you'd want to do is say arrive on a fixed size of dimension that can accommodate a fixed number of people, say 5 people, and then you say, okay, that's the plotted circles we're going to use on the whole of the site. And then it would be very easy to do that, and then you could sell into those circles. It may well be that you're putting 3 people into a space that you'd like to accommodate 6, but hey ho, it would be much easier to do than trying to plot circles of all sorts of different dimensions, trying to accommodate different numbers of people.
Thanks, Peter.
Or something you might want to consider is, if you have got, as Peter's example there shows, if you've got a bank with 3 lines, you might want to have one with 2 groups of 2, one with groups of 3, one with groups of 4, or something like that. You might want to vary it. But as Peter says, I think it'd be very complex on the same linear space to start doing different ones. But you could actually do it if you've got that banked way of giving different options.
Yeah, good, Mark. Nicky from boxing, for events like boxing and in sports halls, so we're talking indoor events here. Clubs with very limited number of spectators, do we still need to avoid RAG and LAs? I'm not quite sure. LAs, Nicky,
Local authorities?
Local authorities, I'm not sure. Nicky, I'll maybe bring you on live here so you can explain exactly what is it you mean there. Get me 1 second.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, Nicky, work away.
Yeah, sorry, what I meant was, because you mentioned earlier about RAG groups and local authority doing sign-offs and events. Now, obviously with boxing, a lot of our competitions or anything like that will be on a smaller scale, with probably not a lot of numbers in terms of spectators, and we're not envisaging lots of spectators, but I just want to double check in terms of, we probably won't need to involve the likes of the RAG groups or local authority for sign-off, will we?
No, that's probably a one for you, Paddy, but I wouldn't have thought so.
No,
The expert group maybe just for our protocols.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on your numbers. Like, I know that anything under 15, you don't even have to do a risk assessment.
No, more than that.
Yeah, and in terms of even over 30, I mean, you probably would still have to do a risk assessment in terms of how many spectators you can get in. But
yes,
your venue is not a designated venue. The designated venues and where we involve the local councils are the bigger football grounds and rugby grounds. So there's no necessity for you to get approval from the local councils, essentially.
I think, Paddy and Nicky, I think on that, if you're over those 30 people, I think the best route would be to contact your local authority public health and get the right advice from those people. Really, it's as Paddy says, it's not something that's regulated, certified, because you're an indoor venue. You might want to just check the numbers, check how much room you've got, and see what public health say in your local authority, rather than the usual local authority that deals with certification of sports.
Okay. And the only other options I think might be something like, I know they're considering something maybe at the Ulster Hall, obviously for our Ulster elites. Now, also I think that's a larger scale, up to 2,000 people can be capacity, but we'd have to look at the capacity with the Ulster Hall.
Yeah, I mean, is that seating on a?
Yes, it's on. Well,
is it rate seating?
Yes and no. Some of it's raised seating, some of it's ground seating. So
yeah.
Okay, what date is that there?
No dates. No, literally, they're just nothing's been put out there. It was just a thought, really. I know that they're thinking about it potentially as a test event.
Yeah. So I think we've probably covered, Nicky, both those things. So your flat area would be really restrictive. So each person, if they're not in a group, would need 6.8 square meters. But then obviously the SGO2T guidance that we gave, and that example that Peter started with that seating deck, that would be relevant for an indoor arena, the same as an outdoor.
Yeah, and the other one was potentially the likes of Ulster University, where we've got the elite training squads over there. They've been doing bits and pieces anyway in terms of bringing in squad training, but that's about it. I think they're keen to do something around spectators to be able to bring some in to view the training that's going on and view some of the sparring.
In terms of dates, Nick, I think the important thing here is the next review meeting's 3 weeks away. It's the 10th of June. I would imagine that we're going to hear then an update in relation to indoor spectators. As of the minute, there's no indoor spectators allowed. The 21st of June is the date I had stated earlier, and it does say in the Northern Ireland Executive's last review was that restrictions are being removed on indoor audiences. So that, to me, that would be the date I'd be looking at in terms of spectators coming back. However, there might well be at the next review, there might be a provision for limited spectators prior to that date. So I would just keep my eye on those dates. And I don't
envisage anything anytime soon.
Exactly, I was just about to say, you probably don't have anything in the next 2 weeks anyway, so
definitely not.
Hold fire, and hopefully you'll hear better news come the 10th of June.